Okay, well, welcome and thank you for attending the first public consultation meeting for the 2025 review of the Revitalizing Hamilton Commercial District's Community Improvement Plan. My name is John Paul Loiacono, and I'm a planner here in the Economic Development Division of the Planning and Economic Development Department. And we'll get into the description of our review. So just a little bit before getting into the review itself and the CIP and sort of the mechanics of a community improvement plan, I just wanted to just introduce very high level the city's economic development division. So staff here are working to attract investment, support local businesses, stimulate job creation, and also there's a team dedicated to guiding strategic growth across the key sectors, including things like manufacturing, life sciences, agribusiness, and all with an effort to strengthen our local economy and to ensure that Hamilton remains a vibrant, inclusive, and resilient city. And so part of that are our community improvement plans. And so what is a community improvement plan? What is a CIP, as I'll be referring to it throughout this presentation? Well, first, it's a tool municipalities can use if they choose to use it, and that's really important here. That this is a voluntary tool that municipalities can use. So not everyone does. Not all municipalities do. Some choose to use it. So these permissions to create and adopt a CIP come from the Planning Act, and the city's official plan. So this is that document that provides a long-term land use planning vision that guides development and infrastructure decisions, etc. That official plan has specific policies in it that permit CIPs, community improvement plans. And so it is a planning and economic development tool that allows municipalities to really direct investment into specific areas of the city to address specific local needs. And we'll get into some of those needs in a bit. So if not for a CIP, a municipality would not be legally allowed to provide financial incentives for development or will provide financial incentives for development to commercial for-profit entities. That would otherwise be considered illegal. It would be considered bonusing in the Municipal Act. And as part of the CIP sort of process, I'll call it, and part of developing a CIP, municipalities also designate the specific geographic zones and boundaries where the improvements are being targeted and where they are therefore eligible to be used. And these areas are called community improvement project areas. And I'll be showing a map shortly where these exist in the city of Hamilton. So the CIP legislation is quite intentionally broad. So it's not just for fixing physical deterioration of buildings, but it's also used to do things like remediate contaminated lands, like brownfields as an example. So what does the actual CIP look like? It's an actual document. It includes all the legal parts, so the bylaws to put it into force and effect, includes a framework that sets out the specific goals, objectives, and strategies. It includes the CIPAs that I just talked about, these geographic boundaries, and it includes some implementation details. So what these CIPs are essentially a blueprint for revitalization. And that's how municipalities use them. And why do they exist? Well, this is to help with revitalization, economic development, could help with housing goals, as an example, with remediating contaminated lands, like I just mentioned. It can do a number of things. And speaking of that, so what can it and what can it do? A few things to emphasize here. One of them being that the programs, the actual financial incentives found in the CIP, these grants and loans can be used for permanent building improvements or property improvements. So think of like construction cost, but we also extend that to the studies that support development. What a CIP generally cannot be used for are temporary things, things like supplementing lease or rental costs or business expenses. The intention is that it cannot be used for that. And of course, it must be used within these CIPAs, these SEPAs, those geographic boundaries. It must be used within those eligible areas. So now just going back to the review, we're here talking about the review of the Revitalizing Hamilton Commercial District CIP, and that is administered by us, staff here in the Economic Development Division. And this CIP specifically includes 10 financial incentive programs that are made up of loans and grants, and they all have a specific intent, different goals and sort of objectives specifically to the programs. And this CIP, the purpose of this CIP, isn't too different from, I would say, the goals of probably many CIPs across the province, sort of generally. They're intending to enhance buildings. The CIPs are there to help with incentivizing private sector investment. But the other thing that this CIP does is it connects the development of new housing along the commercial corridors and within the commercial districts to really providing demand for existing and new commercial businesses and amenities, and therefore helping revitalize these commercial areas. So this CIP was last reviewed at the start of 2020. Approval happened in 2021, and we're now at the 5-year review cycle. So we review our CIPs every 5 years, and we do that for a few reasons. We want to make sure that the programs we are providing are still effective and meaningful, to continue to encourage private sector investment. We want to ensure that these programs are helping with one of council's priorities, which is for the growth in the non-residential assessment. So reduce the reliance on the residential property taxes as a means for the city's budget. We want to, through the review, ensure that the programs are still financially sustainable. So we look to make sure that this still makes sense within the budget. And we want to make sure that the programs are still aligned with community priorities and council priorities, which could change every 4 years with the cycle of council, but also with changes in legislation. So there's an entire section of the CIP just drilling a little more into the detail of the actual goals of the CIP, not just the sort of general goals. There's more detail, and there are also some objectives of the CIP. So as an example, we want to improve the supply of residential units and commercial businesses. We want to ensure that we're helping redevelop underutilized buildings. So that could look like uh, infill development as an example. We want to improve the aesthetics of private properties to help make a more attractive public realm. But what we're also doing is not only dealing with the aesthetics, but actually actual accessibility of these buildings. So think AODA requirements. We want to help with the functionality of these buildings and the marketability, all leading to improved revitalization of the districts and corridors. And what we also want to do is support residential development to help support future or existing or future recreational and cultural amenities. Basically, everything is related with a strong economy. It's gonna help at, many of the aspects, not just on the corridors themselves, but it could extend beyond the corridors. So within the CIP, as I mentioned, there are programs, and there are specific program terms attached to all the 10 programs within the CIP, and these are the colored boxes. And I'll get into some of the high level of each of them. Additionally, I have there the sort of plus sign to talk about just to reference some of the other CIP and programs we have in place. They're not part of this review. So for example, if you're familiar with our erase programs, which deal with remediation, as an example, that's not part of this review. That was last done in 2023, and that's on a different 5-year cycle. Another example with the heritage programs, they are not part of the CIP. In fact, they're not part of a CIP just because of legislation. They're not required to be. Those heritage programs were actually updated very recently in October. So before getting into each of the programs, this was the community improvement project area I was, or areas of the city that I was mentioning. You can't see the very fine detail on the exact boundaries. I can provide those. We do have other mapping for that, but to fit it into one map, here it is. And what this shows on a high level are just the areas where our programs are available. So, for example, because of just how the city has evolved over time through amalgamation, we have all of the former municipalities, former downtown areas of those municipalities that are reflected here as commercial districts. So for example, downtown Hamilton, Ancaster, Dundas, Flamborough, Glanbrook, and Stony Creek, those are here in blue. And we also have other parts of the city that we refer to as commercial corridors. Sometimes they're the corridors that connect these blue areas, these commercial districts. These areas are not part of a BIA or are not the former downtown areas, but they are still have that Main Street characteristic. They still need revitalization. They still need some incentive to further develop, and they have that same characteristic of that ground floor commercial. The buildings close to the streets, relatively small properties, and most of these areas are in the lower city. So the first set of programs I'll be reviewing, just to give a high level on, are the tax increment grant programs, and there are 2 of them. Sometimes we refer to them as TIGs. I might say that during the presentation. These programs provide a grant based on the uplift in municipal taxes generated from a new development or redevelopment. So for example, you intensify your site, you add housing, more density, you build a bigger building, you will be paying more taxes generally as a result of that. The difference in the taxes you pay from pre-development to post-development is where that grant payment comes from. So the Revitalizing Hamilton tax increment grant, the one on the left here, um, is available in our commercial districts and downtown Hamilton. And that uh, would be for 4 annual grant payments. That is in contrast to the program here, the tax program here on the right, which is available exclusively on the Barton-Kenilworth corridors. And if you look, do a sort of high-level comparison of the two, that Barton-Kenilworth tax increment grant program offers 9 annual grant payments. And the difference here, this is an example of where not only do we target specific areas for programming, for incentives, but even within those targeted areas, those CIPAs, we could have different incentives offered. So for example, in the Barton-Kenilworth corridors, they need a little bit more revitalization, so they need a little bit of a larger incentive. The next set of programs we have are matching grant programs. And I would call these sort of the quintessential CIP programs. Many people who do have some sense of CIPs may think of facade improvement programs, and that's sort of these are, although these programs go beyond that. Essentially, these programs provide for incentives to improve the appearance of the building. So again, that's sort of your facade program, but they also help with the functionality, the accessibility, again, think AODA improvements, and also any environmental sustainability components that you might be retrofitting your building for. Again, so similar programs, different amounts though. So the areas of eligibility are slightly different. So with the commercial district program, you're looking at improvements to commercial or mixed use properties specifically. And this is available throughout all the CIPOs and the eligible boundaries. So that map I showed earlier, it's available across all of them. And it is a matching grant. So they're both matching grants. So you put in $10,000 of your own money covering eligible work, the city will match that with $5,000. But that's up to a maximum of $25,000. For the Barton-Kenilworth Revitalization Grant, very, again, similar program, matching grant, but now that grant payment is up to $50,000. But not only that, it is not only for commercial or mixed-use buildings specifically, but that extends here to multi-residential and institutional properties. And again, that's going back to the fact that Barton-Kenilworth corridors need a little bit more revitalization, so they need a bit more of an incentive. The next set of programs relates to loans we offer. So there are 3 loans, different loans here up on the slide. The first and the second loans relate to or are for residential development. Again, that's one of the goals of the CIPs is to increase dwellings along the corridors. And the 2 programs offer 0% construction loans with a 5-year loan payment. The downtown Barton-Kenilworth program offers a loan up to $4 million max. That program is for at least a minimum of 10 residential units. And then versus the a little bit smaller commercial district grant, again, 0%, 5 years, but you're getting $20,000 of a loan per unit up to a $600,000 max. The third loan up here on the slide relates to the startup office or to incentivize office improvements and new office space. So it's not for residential. And that loan is generally based on the size of the space being either created or renovated, and that loan term is essentially made to reflect the lease length, or at least to a maximum of 5 years. And the final three programs that are part of this CIP include the office conversion grant program. So this was just recently added in earlier this year. It is essentially to help with the conversion costs of purpose-built office buildings to build housing downtown, but also hotels. So there's the economic component as well there. Essentially, you could get between $10,000 to $20,000 of a grant per unit created, and this is a maximum to $2 million. The grant per unit is dependent on the size or the number of bedrooms in each unit. The commercial vacancy assistance program is a sort of small scale storefront activation type version of that previous office program I discussed in the previous slide. It's much less money, but it is a matching grant, and it is for much. You're eligible with much shorter lease lengths. The final program here is a rebate or grant program for, again, Barton Kenilworth corridor specifically, to help with the upfront fees. So before you even get into construction, to help with the planning fees and to help with the building fees, there's the opportunity to get $25,000 maximum for planning fees and a $25,000 maximum grant for building fees. And here, over the next two slides, are a few examples of what we call sort of our programs in action. You can get a flavor of some of the things here. So there are opportunities for murals, for facade improvements. So let's say, for example, that Barton Street property, it received 3 different grants. So that's a really great thing about how our programs work. Barton, like I said, is one of our areas that needs more revitalization perhaps than others. So there's the opportunity to stack the programs, and as long as the eligible works in question per the program terms, as long as those eligible works are not being being incentivized, you're not getting money for those eligible works in all of the different programs. So if you already received a grant for facade improvement, you can't use that same eligible work, let's say it was windows, to get money in other programs. And it could even extend like from the building to the property. So for example, on that Ottawa Street property, you have a permanent patio situation, and they got some incentive, they got some financial help to do that. The next slide looks at a little bit larger developments. So we have our tax increment grants, the startup office tenant program on that Sanford site. They also got some heritage loan grants. So again, that's not part of this review, but that property received heritage grants along with tax increment grant, and they benefited from the office tenant attraction loan. And then recently on that Main Street West property, they just received this construction loan in the summer. So that essentially concludes the presentation, but a little bit on next steps. So hopefully that provided you with a high level of the CIP, what a CIP does, and a high level on our programs. So now what I hope is I could hear from everyone on what their specific feedback is on our programs, whether that's things you think could work well, do work well, or what you want to see changed. The idea is to continue to promote this review, so there's still an opportunity to visit our Engage page, submit any feedback. We're going to continue to promote it on social media to ensure that we get as much feedback from residents and businesses as possible. There will be another public consultation meeting on February 5th. There, the intention is to present all the feedback we received, to then present from that feedback what some of our ideas were based on that feedback, and to perhaps give another opportunity for you to provide some additional comment on that. And then in terms of timing, for approval, the idea is to go before the committee by the end of April, and from there, hopefully, a new CIP is in force and effect, depending on how that goes with council and if they suggest any changes. As an example, this new CIP could be in force and effect as soon as June 2026. So, like I said, I hope the conversation continues, and we look forward to continuing this discussion and chatting in the future. Thank you.